You lay one more finger on her, and I swear I'll drag your empire into the ground. Do you think anyone will believe you, Chuck Norris? That was the line. The one that cut through the music, the laughter, and the tinkling glasses. The one that made every mask in the room crack just a little. The Royal Crescent Hotel in New Orleans was the stage. Guests at the Royal Crescent Hotel used glitter and gowns to display power and prestige. They called it a charity gala. But by the time the cameras were rolling, most had already left. Chuck Norris, 44, stood at the back of the room, calm but alert, observing the scene. He had spent years mastering control, walking through crowds where people never truly saw him. Not just for his fame, but because his presence was quiet, almost invisible tonight, though. Everything changed. Nathaniel Royce, a wealthy software magnate and the guest of honor, stood beneath the grand chandelier, his expectant wife, Evelyn, beside him. A drink tipped, a nervous laugh, and then a slap hard. Sharp Evelyn staggered, and still, no one moved. The guests froze, unsure, afraid of losing influence, status, or money. Even the cameras felt powerless in the tense room. But not Chuck. He didn't step in for heroism. He didn't even know if he would speak, but he did. Please stop. She's going to have a baby. Nathaniel's eyes blazed, scanning the room. What did you just say? He demanded. I told you to stop. You're hurting her. Then, cold mocking, came the taunt. Do you really think anyone will believe you, Chuck Norris? The words hung in the air, but Chuck didn't move. Not an inch. That single moment would ignite a battle. Not just for Evelyn, but for every voice that had been silenced, for every injustice dismissed. This incident wasn't merely a scandal. It was a story about defiance, honor, and courage. You're watching Hidden Worth, a show dedicated to untold stories. Keep watching, because some voices refuse to be silenced. Before that night, Chuck Norris had been a figure of quiet strength. He moved through life with measured steps, unnoticed by many. He entered early, stayed late, mastering invisibility in rooms full of wealth and whispers. When someone bumped into him, he apologized. When someone misnamed him, he let it slide. People weren't supposed to notice Chuck unless he allowed it. At the Royal Crescent Hotel, guests knew him for three things: his presence, his precision, and his calm demeanor. His calm wasn't peace, it was control. It prevented conflict, diffused tension, and kept him safe in spaces that could be hostile. He understood the rules: speak when spoken to, never correct a mistake publicly, and above all, never make a scene. Chuck had witnessed others face consequences for less. He stayed, not for acceptance, but because some battles demanded patience. Bills had to be paid, commitments kept, responsibilities carried. Sir, another drink? Someone asked. Chuck's reply was measured, polite, even when provoked. That was survival. He wasn't bitter, just disciplined. But that night, the moment the world finally recognized him, he had already endured hours of observation, watching, waiting. His body was tired. His mind calculated the cheapest way home. He almost made it through without being noticed, until he saw Evelyn's horrified expression and heard that slap. Something inside him shifted. There was no scream, no dramatic outburst. It was quiet, deliberate, like ice cracking slowly. He surveyed the room, expecting someone else to intervene. Silence. Only the bubbles in the champagne glasses moved. Then Chuck stepped forward, into the center of the room, into the gaze of power, into the moment that demanded courage. He didn't feel invincible. He was wary, cautious, even afraid. But a deeper sense drove him. People were finally seeing him. Not the image, not the reputation, not the myth, but him. And he would not back down. Invisible people had no safety. Perhaps someone else could find it if they were witnessed. If someone acted. Nathaniel Royce had little patience for interruption, especially from someone he assumed was merely a bystander. When Chuck spoke, Royce's eyes tracked him like a storm contained behind a glass facade. Rage is usually loud, explosive, but Royce's wrath was different, precise, sharp, deliberate, like a blade poised to strike. He stared, trying to measure the man who had dared challenge him. Chuck stood small but unyielding, holding the space between truth and fear. His eyes were steady, and that unnerved Royce further. "What did you just say?" Royce asked, his voice low, cold, deadly. Chuck's hands were steady, but he didn't look away. "I told you to stop. She's going to have a baby." A quiet, mocking chuckle escaped Royce, not a laugh of humor, but one of disdain. "You think this is your business? Serve drinks. That's all you need to do." Evelyn, still on the ground, her lip bleeding, attempted to speak, but fear silenced her. Chuck, however, was unwavering. He knew something deeper was at stake: safety, justice, accountability. Tonight wasn't just about a single act of violence. It was about who had the courage to intervene when everyone else froze. Chuck's presence changed the room's energy. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't theatrics. It was command, quiet and undeniable. People watched, unsure, but unable to ignore him. Power had shifted, if only for a moment. The invisible had spoken. For years, Chuck Norris had been the silent force. He observed, waited, endured. He knew the subtleties of influence, the silent rules of power, the invisible threads that kept the privileged protected. And yet, he also understood when silence became complicity. That night, he chose action over fear. The Royal Crescent Hotel would remember the moment. Not just for the scandal, not for the slap, but for the man who refused to be invisible. He didn't raise his voice unnecessarily, didn't escalate beyond necessity. He simply stood for what was right when it mattered. Every guest, every onlooker was forced to acknowledge reality. Not just Chuck Norris, the martial artist or the legend, but Chuck Norris, a human, a witness, a protector. That clarity changed the room, leaving its mark long after the cameras were off. In that moment, a narrative began, one about courage, accountability, and the quiet power of speaking up. The story wasn't about fame or celebrity. It was about presence, action, and the refusal to let fear dictate morality. Chuck's intervention was simple, but its consequences were profound. Not only did it challenge Nathaniel Royce, it sparked a wider conversation about responsibility and justice. The room, once filled with glitter and pretense, was now confronted with the stark reality of courage. This was more than a single incident. It was a lesson in visibility, bravery, and the importance of stepping forward when no one else will. Chuck Norris had moved from shadow to center, showing that sometimes strength isn't loud. It's deliberate, measured, and unyielding. And as the night unfolded, everyone understood something fundamental. Courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's simply about standing in truth. Chuck Norris stood, and in doing so reminded the world that action, when grounded in integrity, speaks louder than silence ever could. The tension in the room was thick. Nathaniel's face was red with anger, veins bulging as he spat out, "You made me look bad in front of the board." He raised his hand, pointing at Chuck like he was nothing. He was furious. A $2,000 bottle of wine had just stained a $20,000 suit, and Nathaniel moved aggressively toward the man he thought would submit. But Chuck Norris was faster. Without a word, he stepped forward, putting himself directly between Nathaniel and anyone else in the room. The noise from the jazz band in the corner faded, as all eyes turned to the unfolding scene. Chuck didn't yell. He didn't plead. He simply raised his hand slightly, steady and calm, like a man prepared for whatever came next. Nathaniel struck. The slap landed, sharp and loud, louder than any music in the room. But Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't stumble or cry out. He stood there, hand on his face, breathing steadily through the sting. Nathaniel leaned closer, venom dripping from his words. "Do you really think anyone will believe you?" Chuck Norris didn't respond. Instead, his gaze stayed locked on Nathaniel, steady and unshaken. He understood the real power wasn't in Nathaniel's wealth or influence. It was in truth, and in the witnesses who were watching. From the side of his pocket, Chuck pulled out his phone and hit record. "I don't need them to believe me," he said quietly. "I only need them to see." The effect was immediate. One by one, gasps filled the room. The air seemed to stop moving. For the first time that night, Nathaniel Royce blinked, as if the reality he'd controlled for so long was slipping through his fingers. Chuck, the man meant to break, remained standing. His hands shook slightly, face stinging, but the phone captured every moment. Guests murmured, unsure of how to react. Some were impressed, some were terrified, but no one stepped forward. No one except Marcus Hall, the head chef at the hotel. Tall, broad, shouldered, apron still on. Marcus had been watching from the kitchen doorway, transfixed. The slap had hit him like a physical blow. Marcus and Chuck had been friends for 2 years. Sheer loyalty and shared moments in the kitchen cemented a bond that no amount of power or wealth could erase. Marcus pushed through the crowd of onlookers, stepping directly in front of Nathaniel. The room went silent. "That's enough," Marcus said, calm but firm. "She told you to stop, leave. I'm asking you." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes, hissing. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I do. But tonight, you're just a man striking someone who won't back down." Security on the sidelines shifted uncomfortably. Their salaries didn't cover being part of such a spectacle, and they clearly weren't prepared for the PR nightmare that was unfolding. Nathaniel pointed, growling. "You're both fired. You'll never work in this city again." Marcus shrugged. "I'd rather lose a job than be part of this." He raised his phone, recording the scene too. Nathaniel's expression changed. Pale, not from fear but realization. Every phone in that room was now a witness. Video was power, and he had none. He adjusted his jacket and forced a tight smile. "Let's not make this a bigger deal than it is," he said, gritting his teeth. But it was already too late. For the first time, Nathaniel Royce did not control the narrative. Chuck Norris, the unexpected force in the room, held the script, and the world outside that hall would soon know it. Morning came cold, colder than it should have been. New Orleans, known for its music, vibrancy, and heat, was silent. Not the calm before dawn, but the quiet before a storm. Chuck Norris sat on the edge of a modest twin mattress in a studio apartment, barely larger than a hotel restroom. Sleep had evaded him. The slap still burned, but it wasn't pain that kept him awake. It was silence. No headlines. No news stories. No tweets. Nothing. Searching hashtags and feeds yielded zero information on Nathaniel Royce. It was as though the night had never occurred. Some guests had filmed parts of the confrontation, but the footage had vanished, lost like crumbs after a meal. Chuck checked his messages. At 3 a.m., a friend texted, "Are you okay? I saw something, but it's gone now. Be careful." The voicemail indicator glowed red. One new message from the hotel staff read, "You are suspended immediately while we investigate your behavior at last night's event." Chuck replayed the message 3 times, as if the words could change meaning. Behavior, he thought. He had only intervened to stop a violent act. Yet the hotel's priorities were clear: power, and appearances mattered more than right and wrong. Still, he knew what had happened could not be erased. The truth was in his hands, in the phones of the witnesses and in the resilience he carried. Nathaniel Royce had wealth, authority, and influence, but Chuck Norris had something far stronger: courage, integrity, and evidence. The incident would ripple beyond that hotel hall. People who had been present would speak. Those who had recorded would share. And in a world where video was law, the tables had finally turned. For the first time, Nathaniel Royce felt powerless, not because of force, but because the truth had a new owner. Chuck Norris, a man meant to be an observer, had become the unexpected pivot of justice, and though the city seemed quiet that morning, it was only a pause. A storm was coming, one fueled not by revenge, but by accountability and visibility. Inside his small apartment, Chuck Norris reflected on what had happened. He had faced the unimaginable, a man with power striking someone vulnerable, and responded with clarity, calm, and purpose. The slap, the threats, and the empty silence around him could not diminish the moment. It had been recorded, remembered, and witnessed. Across the city, Nathaniel Royce went on with his life, unaware of the real story that would soon emerge. He assumed control, but control was an illusion. Chuck had taken the first steps to ensure the world would see. He had taken the first steps to make sure justice wasn't delayed. And in that quiet studio apartment, Chuck Norris didn't feel helpless. He felt ready. Ready to show that no matter how much money, power, or influence one held, the courage to stand and the foresight to record could shift everything. The world may not have known it yet, but a storm had begun. One video at a time, one witness at a time, the truth would no longer be denied. And Chuck Norris, calm, collected, and steady, was at its center. They saw danger, responsibility. Someone was making the wrong kind of noise, and they noticed immediately. Her phone buzzed again. The world may not have known it yet, but a storm had begun. One video at a time, one witness at a time. The truth would no longer be denied. And Chuck Norris, calm, collected, and steady, was at its center. They saw danger, responsibility. Someone was making the wrong kind of noise, and they noticed immediately. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus, I got the same thing. They're putting this away. He sounded tired, almost lost. She didn't blame him. She glanced at her phone. Was the footage still there, broken? The camera had stopped filming just before the slap. She wasn't sure if it was an accident or something else, but the evidence was gone. All that remained were memories and the physical cuts left behind. By midday, there was a knock at the door. Amara opened it to find a man in a black suit holding a white envelope. Inside was a legal notice. She hadn't signed any confidentiality agreement yet. The warning was clear. Any attempt to talk about Chuck Norris or his family in public could result in legal action. She sat down, hands trembling, eyes burning. They weren't scared. They were furious. They wanted her gone, erased from sight. But they didn't know the full story. She had found her voice the night before, and this time she wasn't giving it back. Before hitting post, the body questions every decision for a moment. Amara Lewis sat on her old couch, hoodie on, hair tied up, laptop screen glowing in the dark. Over 36 hours had passed since the gala, the hit, the silence. Chuck Norris was still in the news, but not for the wrong he'd done. It was for his donations, his so-called philanthropy. Headlines called him a visionary leader. And Evelyn, no mentions, no articles. The hospital stayed silent, no updates, gone. Her phone buzzed again, another blocked number. Be wise, be quiet. You won't gain anything. But Amra had already lost too much. Her work, her income, her sense of calm. She stared at her manuscript on the laptop. This was her narrative. No spin, no filter. When Evelyn fell, it marked a turning point. The look in her eyes said everything. Nobody stepped in. Amra didn't have the full video, but she knew the truth. And sometimes truth is louder than proof. She took a breath, hit record, and began speaking. Amara Lewis. I was working at the Royal Crescent Hotel's gala when I saw something nobody else wanted to see. She explained the slap, the quiet, the hit, the warnings that no one would believe her. She uploaded the video on her page, no hashtags, no media outlets. The story spoke for itself. Within hours, her inbox exploded. Old contacts reached out, strangers from across states, survivors, people who had been silenced. Someone shared shaky footage by midnight. It was raw, unpolished, but real. It showed Amara stepping in, taking a hit, and standing firm. Number Justice Forviland started trending. Others shared their experiences, amplifying her voice. But daylight also brought threats. Trolls, fake accounts, claims she was lying, that she sought fame. Some media outlets framed her as a attention seeker. Despite the noise, people watched. They gave support. Amara didn't respond to hate. She wasn't seeking approval. She acted because it had to be done, and maybe if enough people spoke, Evelyn could finally be heard. The following days were surreal. Amara avoided the public eye. Too many calls, too many messages, some helpful, some frightening. She disconnected from social media, unplugged her television. She wasn't hiding out of fear. She was exhausted. Adrenaline fades, and the body begins to feel the cost of standing up. The hotel remained silent. Chuck Norris's team issued a carefully worded statement. Mr. Norris disputes all claims and has always acted professionally. Evelyn wasn't mentioned. No concern for her well-being, only silence. Then, at 2:14 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message froze her. I saw what you did. Come to St. Jude's Hospital. Midnight. Don't tell anyone. No name, no picture. Just the place and time. She stared at it for an hour. A trap, a trick. But it felt authentic, like a voice speaking through a crack in the door. She left. The hospital was silent. Fluorescent lights hummed. Heart racing, she walked down the hall to room 318. She knocked once, then entered. There she was, Evelyn, pale, wrapped in oversized blankets, weak, but her eyes were clear, unwavering. "You came," Evelyn said softly. "I wasn't sure you were okay," Amara replied. "You disappeared." "I had to," Evelyn whispered. "He would have found me." They spoke for hours. Not just about the gala, but years of control, fear, and silence. Evelyn admitted, "I never thought anyone would believe me. Then I saw you. You stood when I couldn't. That changed everything." Evelyn handed Amara a small flash drive. "It's all here," she said quietly. "Security footage I saved before it was deleted." Amara's hand shook. "I don't know what to say." "Say the truth," Evelyn urged. "And make sure the world hears it this time." Two women, one battered but unbroken, the other determined, sat together in that quiet hospital room. For the first time they felt seen. 1 year later, Black Stories. The board called an emergency vote, launching an official investigation. Amara stayed quiet, not from fear, but because her actions spoke louder than words. That night, Marcus brought dinner. They sat on the floor, eating fried chicken, watching the world react. "You lit a fire," he said. She shook her head. "I lit a match, the rest was ready to burn." Then came an email from Evelyn. "They're moving me again. I don't feel safe." Amara's stomach sank. The storm wasn't over. It had only shifted. Now the fight was about safety, for Evelyn, for herself, and for everyone who believed silence was protection. 2 weeks after the video went viral, Nathaniel Royce was called to court. The video was verified, medical records confirmed, witness statements gathered, public pressure was immense. But Royce fought back. His lawyers filed motions, challenged the footage, questioned Amara's credibility, and even suggested Evelyn was emotionally unstable. Everything they could do to delay justice, they did. Amara attended every hearing, not out of obligation, but to witness the truth. She saw Nathaniel in court, calm, arrogant, confident that money could erase what had been done. But power was losing its grip. Talia reported each hearing with blunt honesty, and the public watched, captivated. Headlines counted down. Will Royce fall? Day 3 of the hearing, the Billionaire and Chuck Norris. Why this case matters more than ever. Then the pivotal moment came. A former executive, previously unnamed, took the stand. Nathaniel expected to control his testimony, but he couldn't. The man swore to tell the truth. He saw Royce hit Evelyn repeatedly, helped hide it, and was terrified. The courtroom fell silent. Amara felt something she hadn't in weeks. Hope the judge called a break. Reporters crowded outside. Nathaniel appeared, shaken. Royce Dynamics stock dropped again. Board members resigned. Sponsors pulled out. Evelyn watched safely from a secure location, holding Amara's hand. They were quiet, but no longer afraid. The trial continued, but the story had changed. Winning or losing mattered less than standing firm. When truth confronts power, it doesn't bend, it shatters. And when it breaks, light shines through the cracks. A year later, Nathaniel Royce was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. His empire crumbled, buildings were renamed. Royce became a cautionary tale rather than a legacy, but the story wasn't about him. It was about what came next. Amara stood before a small brick building in New Orleans' East Side. For years, the community center had been abandoned. Now, in gold letters, the Lights Foundation. Sunlight poured through windows once boarded up. Volunteers lined up, smiling despite tears. Amara held the microphone, her hands steady. "This isn't just a building," she said firmly. "This is a promise." The foundation of light wasn't built on donations alone. It was built by courage, by people nationwide, who believed voices like Amara's deserved to be heard and protected. The center offered refuge, legal support, counseling, and workshops on speaking up and navigating life after trauma. It offered hope. Evelyn Royce was present, hair grown back, eyes softer yet wiser. She stayed in the background, no longer seeking attention. She had survived. After the ribbon cutting, a young girl approached Amara, notebook clutched to her chest. "Miss Amara," she said, "my teacher showed us your video. I want to be brave like you." Amara knelt. "You already are," she said. The girl grinned and ran off. Marcus laughed nearby. "Now you're a hero to someone." Amara looked around at strangers who felt like family. "I'm just a woman who didn't stay silent," she said. But she had become more. A voice that sparked change, a reminder that truth, even quietly spoken, shakes the world. The foundation of light wasn't about one person. It was for everyone who had ever been ignored, silenced, or unseen. They finally had a place to be heard, and a chance to start over. Bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a server, exhausted and afraid, choosing to speak when others remain silent. Amara Lewis never sought fame, she sought justice. She stayed strong even when it seemed no one would help. And truth doesn't need a crowd to ignite. It only needs one person. Amara's story teaches that fear meets purpose. Systems can fail. Money can suppress news. Power often protects itself first. But people are watching, and when the truth emerges, it cannot be stopped. This isn't just about race or gender. It's about human dignity, respect, and courage. It's about standing when the world tells you to sit. You might think, "I'm not brave. I don't have a platform. I'm only one person." But that's exactly the point. Amara had no following. No bodyguards. Her hands shook. Her phone was broken. Yet she acted. Courage doesn't come from fearlessness. It comes from doing what's right despite fear. Every time someone refuses invisibility,